Our guest today has been called one of the most influential figures in the New York live music business by the New York Times, and is currently the Director of Public Programming for Lincoln Center, where he produces Midsummer Night's Swing, Lincoln Center Out of Doors, and also programs the new David Rubenstein Atrium. Prior to that, he was director of Joe's Pub for 6 years, and before that, where he initiated the Tony Award-winning musical Passing Strange with our friend Stu, who was here last week. And prior to that, was the artistic director of Central Park SummerStage, music curator at Symphony Space, associate producer at George Wein's Festival Productions, a music advisor for the TED conferences, and last but not least, DJs internationally as Acidophilus with the GlobeSonic Sound System. Please welcome Bill Bragin. Thanks for coming. So do you want to, should we start by, maybe it's nice to show a little video to give people a sense of what you do, or
sure.
You want to talk a little bit first?
Yeah, no, well, I guess, yeah, let's show a couple of videos. So there are a couple of different things that I do. In my main job, I produce a couple of different festivals at Lincoln Center. One is Lincoln Center Outdoors, which is a free multidisciplinary festival, music, dance, spoken word, things of all types, including this past year we did a really great project called A Tale of Two Nations with Scott Kentner from Maracatu, New York, and Nation Beat. He'll be talking to you, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
And New School Jazz faculty member.
And then I also produce Midsummer Night's Swing, which is a festival of live music for social dancing. And it's a very different kind of event from other things that I've done in the past as well. And so I've got a great kind of just minute-long video about that. So I'll show you that. And then separate from all that, while I was at the Public Theater, I co-founded a world music showcase festival called globalFEST that we have completed our first decade. It started as an event. We've started to evolve into a not-for-profit year-round service organization. We are in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign for the next edition, and we've got just about a half-a-minute video that just talks a little bit about what globalFEST is about. So I figure we'll just watch both of those things to just frame a little bit of what some of my work has been about.
And Bill doesn't talk about this much, but he's also a trumpeter, and yeah, I'm going to give you credit for that. And also a serious music fan, and a guy who goes out to almost everything all the time. And I've known Bill been fortunate to work with him and know him on a personal basis for many years. And I think of him as one of the really wonderful supporters of artists and musicians, and an innovator, and someone who takes a chance on things and is willing to introduce artists to his audiences, and has gained the trust of a lot of audiences in all the places he's worked through that. So I think that makes him different from some of the other presenters or just a regular club booker. And so I feel like Bill's reach far exceeds just Lincoln Center programming. So I want you to keep that in mind. Should we show the Midsummer Night's Swing video first?
Yeah, let's start with that. And this video is just on our website. We use this as our sort of curtain raiser when we announced the season at the beginning of last summer. The main thing to know about it is Midsummer Night's Swing is a combination of a paid and a free festival. We sell tickets to the dance floor. It's about live music for social dancing, swing, salsa, tango, partner dancing of all types, R&B. We also have, it's about a 1,000-person capacity dance floor, 1,200 people, and then there's also a free audience that comes and dances and listens from outside the plaza. So it's really kind of a hybrid event, and it's got both an artistic mission, but there's also a big social mission, which is about sort of building community through this shared artistic experience. And you just get a little flavor of what it's all about. So that's the day job. And then actually, let's flip to the other one too. We'll just kind of get these all out of the way now. And this is my side project. I co-produce this with two partners, Shanta Fake, who runs Joe's Pub at the Public Theater, and Isabel Sofer, who has an independent company called Live Sounds, produces shows all around the city, CUNY Graduate Center, Pace University, Live at 365. And we do this all as volunteers and have been doing it for now going into 11 years. We started globalFEST 10 years ago really to help support cultural exchange. Part of it was that we were arts presenters working in the world music community, and we wanted to move it more to the center of the conversation in the performing arts field. So there's an aspect of this that's about being a professional event in conjunction with the Arts Presenters Conference. And it was really important at the time. This was post 9/11, during the beginning of the Iraq War, where the borders were closing, xenophobia was rising. So we really wanted to support a more internationalist perspective. So that was really the impetus to start it. What we found is over the past 10 years, we've been really successful catalyzing interest in global music. The audience who comes are a combination of general public from all around New York City who just get an incredible event, as well as professionals who are the curators and programmers from performing arts centers and festivals and nightclubs all around the country and really all around the world. And they're here to discover new artists that will end up on their stages. So it's also been about stimulating touring. 10 years later, we're also starting to become more of a service organization. We got support from the Ford Foundation a few years ago and started the globalFEST Touring Fund. So we are able to help support artists who have performed at previous editions to get to new markets across the country. There's always a gap between the kinds of fees that people can pay and the real cost of touring. And so we're helping to fill that gap and really enable artists to play all across the United States. And first and foremost, it's really about exposing audiences to great new music from all around the globe.
Yeah, you can applaud that, please.
And you can also donate too, well, really.
So, Bill, there's been everyone's talking about how the music industry has changed so much. Everybody knows the situation with recorded music. That income stream has shrunk drastically. How do you think the health of the live music segment is? As someone who's in the front row, still a very viable thing for musicians, for emerging artists to perform. A lot of clubs are closing in New York. Maybe you could let us know what you think about the kind of state of live music, both in New York and nationally, if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the state of live music in general is good. It's always difficult for an emerging artist, and it kind of always will be, but I find that there is a greater openness. I've always played this role I consider myself being in the music business up until about 93. So I presented concerts when I was in college. I went to work for George Wein, who produces, the Newport Jazz Festival, founded the Newport Jazz Festival, founded New Orleans Jazz and Heritage, JBC. And so I worked for corporate-sponsored music events and thought of myself as being in the music business. In about 93, when I went to Central Park SummerStage, I started thinking of myself as being in the performing arts. And I started thinking of myself as an arts presenter, doing a lot of the same things with the same artists, but sort of changing a little bit of my perspective and putting more of a mission focus in there rather than just the kind of financial focus. And at that time, I was sort of like the young guy in the performing arts room. And part of my goal kind of within that was to bring artists that were kind of more independent artists, more globally minded artists who were sort of outside of that circuit more into the middle of it. And that has sort of become part of my role in all the places I've worked. So when I went from Central Park SummerStage to Symphony Space, it was when they were renovating, and I was brought in as a kind of a change agent to bring in younger, more diverse audiences. When Lincoln Center recruited me from Joe's Pub, it was a similar kind of thing. They were redeveloping the physical campus, trying to make it more open and accessible, and they brought me there from a programming standpoint to do a similar thing. I think what happened with me is sort of a parallel with what's happening around the country with a lot of my peers and people that I grew up with when I was at some of these conferences and I was in my kind of late 20s and feeling kind of really young and an outsider. We're now this kind of generation that is kind of inside and helping to make the programming decisions. And so what you're seeing is that people who might have been just strictly doing kind of a club circuit, independent circuit, doing strictly door deals, are now getting opportunities within the performing arts world where the fees are better, the conditions are better, you're taken better care of. You can't work as often. A lot of time performing arts centers will book you once and then not book you again for 3 to 5 years. So you can't sustain a career solely on sort of the performing arts, but there is an openness and it becomes an anchor. And so something like globalFEST, part of our goal within that was to take a lot of sort of artists from world music as broadly defined as you'd want to define world music, from kind of global-based DJ-driven stuff to really traditional world music, and getting it into these settings where artists might get better opportunities. So I'm seeing that there's an openness there, and that's been something that I've been working on. The problem is that the record business has really ceased to be a big player in terms of the finances. I was on a panel for ASCAP this week as part of a sort of a grants program that ASCAP has, and sort of really looking through some of the proposals. Almost all the things we were looking at was when artists were describing where their revenue was coming. It was mostly coming from sync licenses. It wasn't, they were gigging a lot. There were some groups that were doing a lot of touring, doing 30, 50, 100, 150 dates a year. But there were also people who were doing three dates a year. But then they listed, well, I've got this placement on MTV and these 4 series, and so I think people are patching it together in lots of different ways.
Maybe you can talk about how you've seen artists grow, or suggestions about how artists can build their audience, both for live shows, but also the broader presence to get on the radar of people like yourself or other programmers or writers.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one way. One of the artists that I've been sort of championing for a while is this Cuban percussionist, Pedrito Martinez. He won the Thelonious Monk hand drumming competition years ago. He was one of the co-founding members of Yerba Buena, got a big Latin alternative band. He is an incredible bata player and plays in traditional kind of rumbas, and then he also plays with Wynton Marsalis and the Jazz Lincoln Center Orchestra, and is sort of like the first call hand drummer. He made a home at a Cuban restaurant Midtown about 4.5 years ago, plays 3 sets a night, 3 nights a week for the past 4 years. And that home base became kind of just an incredible place. It's not a place I don't think he's ever made a lot of money, but doing 9 sets a week with the same musicians, the level of musicianship that developed and then the buzz that developed has been extraordinary for them artistically. They only are now just putting out their debut CD, even though the buzz has been going on for a while. They're doing a CD release show at City Winery this Tuesday. NPR just put the album up on First Listen. So it's getting this kind of incredible national attention, but it was really like, fundamentally, they played on a stage for a while that used to be a closet in the middle of a Cuban restaurant that they kind of blew out, turned into a stage. Eventually, they got them to build them a slightly bigger stage. But then he would show up in the room, and one night Wynton Marsalis is there with Eric Clapton. Another night there, Bernard Purdie is there. Another night, Giovanni Hidalgo is there and sitting in. Lou Soloff is sitting in. And when I would have artists coming in from out of the country, I would bring them down to check them out. And sort of it helped them build both artistically, but also build a buzz, so that by the time they were ready to put the record out, there was already, they've already been playing at the Montreux Jazz Festival, the Montreal Jazz Festival, and and kind of playing the most prestigious events in the world when their home base is a restaurant Midtown that no one's ever heard of. So I mean, that's one way of doing it. I think that for a lot of people, it is, you start locally, build the story, have a home base, and then build out. Don't try to tackle the world. I was on a panel in Chicago for the Chicago Music Summit, sort of about that process. And a big part of it is sort of developing the story and then going back. I think that a lot of people, when they try to do a tour, go really scattershot and try to hit a lot of new markets, and then it uses a lot of resources, a lot of time, and then they can't go back again. You don't actually build a fan base that way. I think you build a fan base in another city the same way you do it in your home city. You play, you get some fans, you make sure you get everybody's email addresses, you stay in communication, you build a buzz, you come back again, and then you build it out. And so I think it's important to do that, and it's important to get a champion. So there are artists that I've worked with at various points where I think, all right, this is a really great artist. I want to tell my peers about it. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't realize how much people who you think are in competition with one another are actually talking to each other all the time. So if you do a great job, if you do a great show, you're great to work with, that word will get out. If you're an asshole, that word will get out too. And I'm constantly calling, whether it's other festivals or people who ran other clubs and said, I'm thinking about booking this person, what do you think? And you'll get really honest answers. You'll also get honest answers when someone says, oh yeah, we played SOBs and we filled up the room. And then I call up Larry Gold, who owns SOBs, and he's like, yeah, there were about 100 people there that night, and
Which is 25% full,
yeah. And so the second you get caught sort of misrepresenting yourself to that too, the word gets out. So I think, but on the positive side is, Larry will call me up sometimes and say, we just had this group in here, I think you would really like them. I am on a listserv of about 150 world music presenters all around the US and Canada, and we're all constantly, we're sharing our lineups with one another. We are collaborating in terms of, like Scott's project, we're collaborating in terms of projects that one of us wants to do and is looking for partners, so we're pitching one another. There are tours that I might be trying to present an artist in New York, and I realize that the only way it will work is if they can get 2 or 3 other dates. And so we're pitching one another as presenters, as curators, as much as the agents are pitching us, and sometimes more.
Is there something other than just being a great performer or great virtuoso on your instrument that sets those who makes a successful name for themselves or career apart from their peers?
Yeah, I mean, I think at Joe's Pub I booked about 500 shows a year. And that was just a fraction of the numbers of artists who artistically were worthy of being in that room. There's no lack of really good artists out there. And so I think you're starting with kind of with a glut of great music. And that's a problem with the recorded industry field too. There's a lot out there. So first and foremost, the music's got to be good. If you assume that's a baseline and that there's a lot of competition on that, then so my first rule, and I say it only half joking, is don't be an asshole. It's really important, especially for people who are kind of really busy and doing a lot of programming and doing a lot of presenting. You want to do it with people that you like working with, and you might be able to get in the door the first time and do a gig. If it's not a pleasurable experience, you're very unlikely to get invited back. And that means also don't just be nice to me because I'm the person who's offering you the gig and negotiating the deal, but it also means that if you're playing in a nightclub, make sure you're treating the sound crew and the production crew with respect. Because if you're cool with me and you're an asshole to the sound guy, I'm going to hear about that. If you are a dick to the waiters or the waitresses, I hear about that too. I mean, and all of those things go into it because the people who are making the shows happen cut across the entire organization. And at the end of the day, we're all there talking to one another and kind of either that person was fantastic, they were such a pleasure to work with, they showed up at sound check on time, they were ready, they got all of the kind of material, all of those positive things, that definitely goes into the bank. And then if you're really difficult to work with, that also gets noted. So I think taking care of the business is really key. You know, I had a show a couple of years ago at Midsummer Night Swing. We had booked an artist for a Bastille Day show, and there was this group from France that we had booked. They ended up canceling their tour. We had to book somebody on really short notice after our brochure was already printed. And there was this local hot jazz band who at the time were just playing underground speakeasies in Brooklyn. They were virtually unknown, a band called the Hot Sardines. We had a partner who was a kind of underground loft party promoter in Brooklyn, Gemini and Scorpio. She said, you should check out this band, you'll like them. We booked them. As soon as I booked them, got an email back right away, got a phone call. We got the photos, got the bios, got the stage plot, all within, probably within a half a day of booking them. The communication happened kind of immediately. So already I was inclined to like them more. They came, they did the show, they did a great show. They got a great response from the dance floor. And then all of our regular kind of swing dance folks who organized dances all year round started asking us for recommendations. They got great recommendations from us to all the swing partners and became sort of mainstays on the scene. Through all of those experiences, lots of other positive interactions, they became sort of a group that I started championing. I recommended them to Shanta, who books Joe's Pub, and even though they've been playing dances, recommended them to play at Joe's Pub, which is a cabaret listening room. We then, globalFEST, curated a festival in Paris, where they asked us to curate New York bands in Paris, and they were one of the groups that we brought to Paris. And so then I actually got to go on the road with them and see again, how did they play to a brand new audience? How were they at the airport? Did they take care of their stuff? They were totally cool on the road. They were fun to be with. So again, we got kind of more interested in supporting and championing them. And then there was a booking agent I know at Columbia Artist Management, one of the biggest, kind of most influential, more kind of corporate booking agencies, and he was looking to expand his roster. We recommended them to him, and he just added them to his roster, and so now they're getting sort of national promotion, and it's all because A, the music was really good, but B, the business was tight. They were really responsive anytime you needed to find something out. If we had an offer for them to do a special event for us, and we didn't have the kind of money that they usually get, they said, all right, you've been a good champion. We'll do this for you for less money than we usually ask for, because we're building a relationship, and then I've got an opportunity that's more money, and so then I'm going to try to get them a gig that's a higher dollar gig. And so I think that, just as an example of the way that you're building relationships, and I think that is fundamentally the thing. And and the same thing, if there are artists that I work with who are disorganized, that you've got to fight to get every piece of information, that don't show up at the sound check on time, that send a stage plot, and then the stage plot is completely different from what they actually need on stage, and then they're bitching out this production crew because they don't have the equipment that they need, that they didn't actually indicate that they needed. Kind of all of those things also get filed away, and say, all right, you know what? There's somebody else that I could program in a similar situation. I'm just not going to choose to work with that person again.
So that leads to the question, because a lot of artists, especially younger artists, I feel are a little resistant to deal with business stuff because, this is not a business school. They don't want to. They think it's not that important as being great musicians. From your point of view, what are the essential business things that any independent artist, or really any artist, to have a sustainable career? What are the basics that really have to be attended to from a business point of view, whether it's relating to someone like yourself or just in general? Is there anything more to add to like this kind of basic stuff of the bio, the stage plot, the writer, or is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Yeah. First, I think that this idea that that an artist's life is one that's purely about art making is largely non-functional in the kind of the state of the music business right now, and in many cases was never truly functional. But even more now, artists are entrepreneurs, and they need to treat their careers as, as entrepreneurs, and do the things that you need to do to grow a business. That doesn't mean that every artist is good at doing business. Not every artist is good on the phone. Not every artist is good at kind of emails. Sometimes if you're on the road for a long time, it's just really hard to do all those things. Then you have to have somebody who does that for you. So if you can't do it yourself, you need to surround yourself with someone who will take care of those things for you. In addition to the sort of like the kind of behavior of just having the information and delivering it.
So communication. Communication
is really key. There are artists that I booked. Again, started at Joe's Pub. There's a singer named Somi who is she's sort of on the margins of kind of jazz and world music. She's a Rwandan, Ugandan background. She's mostly a jazz singer, some international influences, some folk influences. And went for a year or two, I'd be going around in my neighborhood in Brooklyn and I'd see, she's got a gig at a local, coffee house or something. And she would have beautiful flyers. And the photography would be really good, and they were well designed, and they were just around. And by the time she got to pitching me to play Joe's Pub, again, assuming the music was good, I was also really aware that, all right, she's someone who really has taken a proactive approach in terms of promoting her career and getting herself out there. And so that I knew if I hired her to do a show, not only would the music be good, but she would be a good partner promotionally to get the word out to her fan base. And, and that's, as I've watched her kind of through her career, it's sort of like every element, what she wears on stage. She found designers who kind of work with her, so she always looks really good on stage. She presents herself really well. She has sort of made a point of doing it, and so then she was able to get increasingly strong record deals. And after kind of being on some very strong independent labels, she now just recently got signed. Sony just reactivated the OK imprint, and she just got signed to OK Records. And she's,
awesome.
Really kind of, a local New York City artist, but who's been really working and I think taking ownership over kind of all the other kind of elements of her career. And sometimes she's done it and had really strong management, kind of assistants and agents. And a lot of times it's just been because she's been super proactive about doing that herself. And then the other thing is, a lot of these artists are people that I've become friends with, but I've become friends with in like a legitimate way where I don't feel like people are trying to work me, and I don't feel like people are kind of networking with me. I think when you're in sort of a gatekeeper position and a position of power, you become very suspicious that people want something from you all the time, and there are people who, whenever I see them, they're immediately pitching me, and I will shut down. So I think the other thing is, again, it goes back to this is about building relationships. You want to build relationships that are authentic and
not just transactional.
Yeah, and I sort of have a rule on Facebook now that I will not accept an artist as a friend on Facebook unless it's somebody that I would have a beer with. That's sort of like my dividing line. But that idea that like I've got a network of thousands and thousands and thousands of artists, but I kind of draw the line. If I know that somebody's just trying to friend me on Facebook because they're going to be pitching me kind of gigs and trying to just kind of get work stuff from me, I don't want to do that there, and that's kind of my space. If it's somebody that after the show I want to kind of go out and have a drink with and actually it becomes a real friendship, like that is a very, it's a very vague line, but I know I've got friends who produce festivals in other parts of the country, and their bar line is, they want to have a meal with you. So, I'm a little bit easier. But I think it's really important is to also, to have those relationships really be kind of authentic and don't always be pitching.
Speaking of pitching, when we were in my office having coffee before we came in here, do you want to relate that story that you told me? And you don't have to mention names, obviously, but
yeah.
but about how someone was calling you and kind of complaining about having to put on their sales.
Yeah, I was in dialogue with an artist, and it's an artist that I've worked with before in kind of various things. They do interesting work, and originally they started because they were working on a grants proposal, and they wanted to see if I might kind of support their proposal for this new project they were doing. And it's an interesting project. It's the kind of thing that I would be interested in. And then it started developing, and I started kind of moving towards, all right, do I let on that I might want to book this? And in this kind of email interaction, the artist just sort of started complaining about how hard it is to hustle for gigs, and now I've got to put on the salesman hat, and blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking, first, you're pitching me right now, so don't complain to me about it, Second, this is someone who has a booking agent, who I've been talking to about things, so if you don't want to do it, you've got someone whose job it is to do that, so let them do their job if that's not something you want to do or are comfortable doing. And see, and then they were also complaining about the sort of the grant process and the funding. And then it's also, if you want to be ambitious and do projects that you can't sustain on your own, then you've got to learn how that works, and you've got to do it without resistance and kind of look at these as opportunities. And there are kind of systems that are in place to help support artists create their work. And it's up to you to learn how to navigate those. Or again, if you don't want to do that, then hire a professional to do it. The same thing, we're doing the Kickstarter campaign for globalFEST, the whole crowdfunding thing. It's the same thing. There are, some artists, completely embrace crowdfunding as a tool, as a mechanism, and some don't want to ask their fans for money and don't want to ask them for help. Well, whether you're asking your fans for money, whether you're asking a record label for money, whether you're asking an investor in your production company for money, at some point or another, unless you're independently wealthy, you need to learn how to ask people to support your work. You need to be able to believe that it has value, believe that you as an artist has value and deserve to get paid for the work that you're doing. And then you need to be able to champion that and kind of bring other people along. Amanda Palmer was co-founding member. She was one half of the Dresden Dolls, sort of a Brechtian punk cabaret group. Came out of Boston, did a lot of work at Joe's Pub, and sort of developed kind of there. Was signed to Roadrunner, so kind of a pretty major indie. Ended up touring, opening for 9 Inch Nails, so did that sort of quasi-major label thing. She is one of the sort of most out there users of Twitter and blogging in terms of her communications with her fans, for better or for worse. It's something she's often criticized for being kind of overly promotional. She's also exceptional at building a direct relationship with her audience. She started via Twitter doing different kinds of events where she would have, like, it's Friday night, nothing's going on, so she has sort of Twitter parties, and I think she sort of got some fame at some point. She raised about $10,000, sort of like going through her closet, selling off T-shirts that she would autograph and send to fans, and sort of started to really recognize the power of her relationship with her fans to help support her career. She started a Kickstarter campaign about a year and a half ago or so, set a $100,000 goal to do the Kickstarter campaign. And it was an ambitious goal. Like, most people don't set $100,000 goals on there. She hit $100,000 in the first day. By the end of the campaign, she raised $1.2 million on Kickstarter. It was a phenomenon. Again, it became the source of both a lot of praise and a lot of criticism. But fundamentally, it was a great extension of this really authentic relationship that she worked really hard to develop with her fan base. And she made a point that when she was on Roadrunner, they sold about 25,000 records, I think, on Roadrunner for Dresden Dolls. And then when they kind of looked at the Kickstarter campaign, they got that $1.2 million from just about 25,000 fans. So the kind of economic model of the crowdsourcing was much more effective for her. She did a TED Talk that went really viral about the art of the ask. And it basically talks about her roots as a busker and about that kind of moment of exchange where you're on the street and you're performing, and in exchange for the performance, someone throws $1 in the pot, and that sort of fundamental moment of, I'm creating something of value, you're recognizing it, you're giving money, and I'm showing my appreciation, and how that has basically set the sort of template for her career. And it's basically about you're not making your audience pay, you're asking them to support your work. And I think that shift is really empowering for a lot of people, because I think people are afraid to kind of put that out there, that you need to be able to cover your rent, you need to be able to cover your practice rooms, you need to be able to go see other shows, like you need to have money for the studio. All the things that it takes to be a musician, they cost money. A lot of people will trade favors, but at the end of the day, you need resources to do what you want to do.
In addition to these kind of communication things and professionalism, can you talk a little bit about what are the other things you're looking for when you're programming? Can you talk about, whether it's a specific, in the case of the Hot Sardines, you needed that kind of 20s hot jazz kind of thing. So sometimes it's a genre-based thing or very need-specific for a bill. But can you talk in a more general way maybe about what you're looking for in artists? What grabs your attention about an artist maybe that you're first encountering that makes you want to learn more or even recommend them or go see their show, book them?
It really varies. And I think one of the things that, for me, the transition from Joe's Pub to Lincoln Center, I had been at Central Park SummerStage, so I had curated large open-air outdoor summer festivals before. Going to Joe's Pub, 150-seat cabaret space, very different aesthetic needs. Different things work there. The finances are different. The stage size is different. So I was looking for different things for Joe's Pub. When I went to Lincoln Center, again, going from a really intimate space to these two outdoor festivals, and each one is really different from one another. So I'm constantly having conversations with artists, even about, are you right for Midsummer Night's Swing or are you right for Lincoln Center Out of Doors? Midsummer Night's Swing is, in a certain way, I sort of describe it as being utilitarian. It's music for dancing. If the music's not good to dance to, it doesn't work on that event. If you are a concert artist and you're taking music that might be swinging and might be rooted in swing, and then you're deconstructing it and you're throwing in kind of off meters, or you're doing extended choruses and lots of soloing, and that's part of the aesthetic, even if it's danceable, if it doesn't work for a dance, it doesn't work for that festival, and I don't want to program it. So there's a certain kind of orthodoxy that's actually really important. People who are dancing social dance, if they're dancing swing, they're dancing salsa, chances are sometimes they're learning from their family, but especially in the case of swing, a lot of people are learning in dance schools, and they're learning to the original records, which are 3.5 minutes long and are exactly the same every time people hear it. And so that's what the dancers are looking for. And there's also the dancers are looking to dance with a lot of different partners over the course of the night. I've been yelled at by audience members because a group did an 8-minute song, and they're like, I don't want to dance with the same person for 8 minutes. What if you're stuck with a bad dancer? So there's kind of like very specific needs to perform in that setting. It's really specific kind of rhythmic and arrangement and tempo things that are really important. And I have that conversation with artists for Midsummer Night's Swing. A lot of my personal taste from my own listening is I'm really interested in artists that are shattering forms, and the more hyphens needed in a description, sort of the better. I want artists who are putting music together in a way that I've never heard it before. That doesn't function for Midsummer Night's Swing, but for Lincoln Center Out of Doors, that is important to me. So I think part of it, in terms of back to kind of the advice, is do your research, know who you're calling or who you're writing to, know what they already book. When I was at Joe's Pub, every once in a while, I would get pitched by a metal band or by a punk band. And they clearly were just going through lists of venues and saying, hey, I want to play your club, with no understanding of, oh, look, these are the people who have played this room before. We're not appropriate. I'm not going to waste my time. I'm not going to waste their time. So I think, understanding who it is that you're calling, understand what they've booked in the past, and being able to then make the comparison. Well, you've booked these 4 artists, and what I'm doing is comparable to them in this way. I think that's really key. And also coming at it with what is the rest of the story. It's a CD release. We've been playing in these venues. We've been drawing this many people. We've got this many Twitter followers, we've got this many likes on Facebook, we have an email list that's this many, we're coming with a corporate sponsor, like whatever other pieces you've got sort of arranged that can set you apart from another artist. Again, assuming the music is a fit, those also go into it. And finding the right time to be in the room. There is not hierarchy is the wrong word, but there are different clubs that are appropriate at different stages in your career. So it's also kind of finding the right moment, and don't try to get into a room that you're not ready to perform in, I think is also important.
Yeah.
If you're playing in places and you get 25 people who come out every time, and it's a room where 25 people feels really good, you might not be ready to play a 150-seat club yet. It doesn't mean you're not making great music, and it doesn't mean that you're not building. It means that the time is wrong, and then if you go and those same 25 people show up that have been a success in the first place, now it feels like a failure. So I think growing it in an organic way is right. If you can't fill it up yourself, finding kind of other groups that you can play with and say, all right, we know we can't do it ourselves, but we can get into this room if we're on a shared bill, and we'll do that.
That's exactly what Todd P. suggested. He was here a few weeks ago. Said the same thing. Snake, you have a question?
Yeah, perfect segue, because I was thinking of Todd P. What do you think about musicians playing for free?
I think that if you're playing for free for the right reasons, I think sometimes you've got to do it. The globalFEST, which is extraordinarily influential, is a showcase festival. For the first 7 or 8 years of the festival, it was a showcase and the artist didn't get paid. I do it as a volunteer, and one of the things that has always been really important to us is that we're not making money on the backs of the musicians who are doing it. We are spending hundreds and hundreds of our own kind of labor hours to produce this. We're raising money to cover the costs, but we're not enriching ourselves while asking the artists to play for free. It is an investment in their career, and the artists have seen the return on investment. I think that's the thing. If you will get a return on investment for playing someplace for free, then it could be a good thing to do. If you're playing for free and the promoter's making a ton of money and not sharing that with you, that's probably not the right thing to do. There was when I was in Chicago last week, Martin Atkins, who's a music business professor now, was the original drummer with Public Image Limited, with Johnny Lydon, was in Killing Joke, played with Ministry and the Nine Inch Nails. He did a talk based on a book he did called Welcome to the Music Business, You're Fucked. And one of his points was there is no single situational answer. I think you need to kind of look at it like, all right, we're going to play for free, but I'm going to play in front of this many people, and I can sell merch, and we'll get all the beer we can drink, or they're going to buy us dinner, or if we play in this restaurant 3 days a week, we don't have to pay for a rehearsal studio, and we'll be able to really kind of develop the communication of the band, and it's a pass the tip jar thing. Maybe that's actually a really good thing, and you're better off doing that. You'll get more out of it in the long run than if you say, no, I'm not going to play unless I get a guarantee of $300. But I think you need to look at what are the benefits and who you're doing it for, and not be taken advantage of or exploited.
Mm-hmm. Do we have another question over here?
Yeah, you were talking about the metal bands and things trying to get booked. Can you talk a little bit about how to turn people down, or how you do that and how you feel about that, and how that kind of ties into not being an asshole?
It's the hardest thing I have to do. It's the thing that I hate the most. I'm a middle child. I am sort of by nature a mediator, and I want everybody to like me. So it's actually like it's a really shitty part of the job. And there are and it's changed over the years. You don't want to tell somebody you don't like their music. I mean that's something that's really difficult. And sometimes I don't like their music now, and 6 months from now, the artist is going to get better, or your ears are going to change, or what have you. So I try really hard not to just say you're bad, I don't like it. there have been points where you kind of just put people off, and then they call you back in another 4 months, and they call you back in another 4 months. And you feel like you're saving somebody's feelings, but in the end, you're kind of leading them on and misleading them, and it's not a good way to do it. So I have been sometimes, I've learned to become more direct in saying to people, I don't think this is a fit, or I'm just not feeling it, or what have you, or I've got so many slots, and and I like what you're doing, but I'm not going to have room for it because there are way more artists that I want to work with than I have programming opportunities. So sometimes it might be couched in that. There are sometimes people who I say that to who get it right away, and it's sort of like it's a good face-saving way to kind of say this isn't going to work and move on. And there are people who then don't hear it and keep pushing. And there is a point at which someone who keeps pushing are going to push themselves to a point where then I am going to say, probably more abruptly, more directly than is appropriate, I don't like your music, And the goal is like you don't want to do that. That is one reason why it's also good to have an agent, have a manager, have somebody else who's calling for the booking. It's easier to have a more candid conversation if it's not directly to the artist. And it's good to not, as the artist, if you are making those calls yourself. Again, some people are really good at it, some people are not. Some people are good at taking constructive criticism well. Some people get defensive. So I think it also, again, it sort of depends on who it is. But it's hard to say no to people. And it's hard when I was at Joe's Pub. I started in September 2001. Right after I started, Fez closed, which used to be just down the block on Lafayette Street, which was another great listening room, slightly smaller. And then the Bottom Line, which was right on 4th Street, closed. Then all of a sudden, we were pretty much the only listening room in town. And now La Poisson Rouge has opened up, and City Winery's opened up, and living room's gotten bigger, and Rockwood's come on and added the second space. But especially, there were a couple of years while I was at Joe's Pub where it was pretty much for certain kinds of artists. If they didn't get booked into Joe's Pub, they weren't going to be able to play New York City. And so there was kind of a certain kind of desperation and responsibility, but at the end of the day, there was only so much programming inventory, and it had to stay down. And it's hard when you know that gig is this important for the artist.
On the flip side, is there anything else that you want to add to making a good pitch? You're an artist, you're maybe not at the stage where there's enough business activity that you can justify having a manager, or an agent's not gonna be there because there's just not enough activity. Or is there any more tips other than, you mentioned the story, doing your research, listing all the sort of things you bring to the table in addition to the good music? Are there any other suggestions you might want to give to people when they're making that pitch for themselves?
Well, I think part of it is having all the information in a really sort of tight package. If it's like, if it's a kind of a one-page EPK, links to online music, kind of in whatever form, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, MySpace, YouTube videos, kind of however you have that. Having that, having a succinct bio, having good photography. Basically, one of the things that I'm looking at as a programmer is, once I decide to book the artist, then I have to attract an audience. Whether I have to sell tickets or attract a free audience, whether I have to get press coverage, I need to think about what tools do I have now to kind of get that out. So the more that I can get that from the artist, if there's good photography and Time Out is going through and doing their listings for the week, the photo editor who's deciding what goes on the page isn't listening to the music at all. They're looking at the quality of the image. So if you've got generic headshots, that's not going to go as far as somebody that's got kind of interesting photography. If you've got, a large group of musicians from far away, it's going to look terrible in a magazine. No one's going to be able to place it. So it's, I think, thinking about those images and how they will be used by the people who are then promoting the shows is really important. I think that kind of, having the story and not filling it with hype. I think, again, whoever's on the receiving side of it has probably seen, 1,000 times more of these than you have. when you start seeing a lot of BS hype, you recognize it really quickly. So I think that, and if you don't have major press coverage yet, then, then get some blog coverage. If you don't have blog coverage, are there some kind of better known artists who can write a testimonial? I think, kind of looking for those champions that can help move you along. I've booked a lot of the emerging artists, a lot of the lesser known artists and independent artists that I've booked have come to me through other artists that I've worked with. So I think, again, sometimes it might be the presenters who are your champions, sometimes it's other artists. I've had singers who've had students of theirs who've said, and they've said, oh, I've got this singer who works with me, they're really good, you should check out their music. Or, I know you like, I know you like this, I know you like me, you will like this one. And that means, that recommendation means more to me.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I mean, you guys have a perfect opportunity to do that. You're a bassist. You haven't had any press coverage, but you know that Reggie Workman respects your work. Ask Reggie if he wouldn't mind giving a brief testimonial that, you're talented and someone to watch. That's going to carry weight. That's something that you can do right here and right now before you start getting press coverage. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I think it's really key. It's finding champions wherever you can, and then again being able to convey it in an interesting way. I haven't booked anybody because they wrote me a good pitch letter, but I've paid more attention. There's one artist in particular that I remember wrote me a pitch letter that was really funny, and I thought, all right, this is someone who actually writes with wit. They had been playing at the Fez, which was a comparable kind of club. They made that case, but they also entertained me with their letter. So I'm like, all right, let me check out their music. If I think the cover letter is entertaining, I might actually think the songs are entertaining too. And that sense of humor and that sort of cleverness actually was also really present in their writing. They became an artist that I did a lot of work with.
Yeah, in other words, don't be afraid to show your personality in especially the bio. I see a lot of bios that are just really boring and starchy and just have, the basic biographical, born here, did this, studied here. I think you can really infuse it with your personality and not to be afraid of that. I want to get into a little bit of, so an artist has your attention. How can an artist work with a programmer to, because I think a lot of, especially inexperienced artists, sometimes have a fear of working with the business people, and they don't know how to work in a symbiotic relationship to achieve these kind of like larger goals. Can we talk a little bit about how an artist can work with their champions to kind of achieve a larger career goal? And in Scott's case, and we're going to talk a lot more about it, but working with Bill as a champion, he was able to pull off a really significant and major tour. Do you have anything to say to that? Is that an interesting question for you?
No, it is an interesting question, and I actually I was joking about how I was going to basically use up Scott's lesson from and kind of do it all now. But there's some no, but there I'll talk a little bit about it, but I'll also talk about, I'm thinking I'll also talk about Stu.
Who was here last week.
That was a good example. But, with the case of Scott, for example, there was a point a couple of years ago where they were finally making a video EPK about the band, and we had met in the audience because one of us was wearing a T-shirt for a really obscure Brazilian band that meant a lot to both of us. And so we just kind of met at the show and kind of realized that we shared musical interests. So again, it wasn't that he was an artist who was pitching me. It was like, oh, we both love music from the northeast of Brazil, and and there aren't very many of us, at that time. So we got to know each other. He started developing a project that he called the Maracatu Jazz Project, and it wasn't because he was asking me for a gig. It was like, all right, this music. He sent me some demos, and he said, here's Maracatu Jazz Project, and I'm like, I like the music, it's a shitty name. You know, it's like, it's a boring academic name, and the music is not that. And, you know, and so, you know, this was, again, just part of the relationship that we had, and he came up with a much better name, Nation Beat. You know, but we, you know, we kind of started that dialogue and that friendship, and then, you know, and then you started booking the band into Joe's Pub, and he was playing around in lots of different places and kind of developing the career for the band. Ended up being one of the artists that we selected for globalFEST, and, you know, and got a fantastic response from that. And then at the point then he was putting together this video with PK. They asked me if I would do a testimonial video and be interviewed for that. And, you know, I get asked to do that all the time. And again, it's one of those things that I have to be really careful. I'm not going to sort of endorse every single artist, even if they like them, but it starts to become meaningless. But because we had this long history that came, again, from sort of an authentic place and a kind of a shared interest, and because I recognized not only the talent of Scott and the band, but also that sort of I recognized the importance culturally of what he was trying to do with this music that was really important. I was like, yeah, I'm going to endorse that and feel comfortable kind of speaking out about why I think what he's doing is special. And so then they put this EPK out and stuck me right at the intro of the video. But that also then, that got the attention of a lot of my peers and colleagues. The fact that I was willing to put myself out there and help be a face and a champion for him. And it's something that I have also turned lots of artists down because I just, you know, I don't want to overexpose myself and I don't want to use that shit too many times. And then, you know, I'll let him talk in a couple of weeks about this larger project. But it was very much kind of an outgrowth of all of those shared interests, kind of artistically, and about the fact that I had been watching the project kind of grow and develop and evolve to the point where I felt like, yeah, this is an amazing next step that I could understand what it meant for Scott and for Nation Beat and for all the musicians around, and I could see how it kind of spoke to my larger interest in the music from that part of the world, and I was now in a position where I could mobilize both the resources of Lincoln Center and some of the grant organizations, as well as enough of my peers around the country that we could actually pull it off. In the case of Stu, you know, he was an artist that I had heard about the Negro problem for a couple of years. I've been involved with the Black Rock Coalition since I was in college. I'd never totally connected with his music, and then I just, in about 2002, I just had a bunch of people saying, like, you've got to know Stu, you would really love his music. At the same time, people were saying to him, oh, you've got to be playing Joe's Pub. That's the right room for you to play in New York City. So finally, we ended up booking him at the Joe's Pub, and it was totally right, and we just kind of clicked right away, started booking him a lot, and we had a sort of a goal, because Joe's Pub is part of the public theater, a goal, you know, Hair started at the public theater, bringing the noise, bringing the funk, chorus line. There was a tradition of theater pieces that started outside of the theater world, going on to become a lot of the signature shows at the public, and the idea of Joe's Pub for a long time was completely separate from the theater goals, and one of the conversations was, how can we start bridging the building? And so I was sort of charged with identifying artists who might not have had a past in theater, but might have a future in theater. And so then this is where Stu and I sort of kind of disagree on what the truth is, but the truth is that I asked him if he had ever kind of thought about writing the theater, and he lied to me and was like, oh yeah, of course, you know, I've got something, I'll send you a treatment. And then he kind of whipped something off and sent it to me, and it was enough to get him in the door and have some meetings with the people, my colleagues on the theatrical side. But it was, you know, part of it was I had booked a couple of shows with him. I had seen what he had done. I had sort of recognized that he had the potential to do something he hadn't done before. The storytelling, the narrative quality, the spiels in between the songs being as entertaining as the songs themselves, the craftsmanship, all of that. And he was game, you know? And so a lot of Passing Strange just started because none of us, I had never worked in, even though I worked at the public, I didn't know anything about theater. But I had colleagues on my side that were also kind of interested and would shore up that part, and brought in a director who could help them develop it. And then we just went without a roadmap and started creating something.
What else do we want to talk? Is there anything else you want to mention? The globalFEST, you can visit the website at globalFEST.org.
globalFEST.org.
Can you give us some little spoilers or hints?
No, but we're going to announce in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So yeah, so it's pretty soon. But let me talk a little bit about that, because that has been, that's kind of the passion project, and I work on it almost as much as my full-time job, and I don't make a penny from it. So it's sort of like, why do I do it? It is something that I've been going since about 1996 to a World Music Showcase conference in Europe called WOMEX. And it's been, for me, one of the most inspiring events that I go to throughout the year. There was kind of a slowly increasing number of people from the US who would go there. And we started doing a lot of work to bring artists to the US for the first time. And then, 3 of us would band together. We'd book a tour. Someone would have financial problems. It's very hard to have a two-footed stool, and tours would collapse. You'd see artists coming over. The epitome of it for me was when I was at SummerStage in '95 for our 10th anniversary. We did a show with Branford Marsalis and Buckshot LaFunk, and we brought an artist from Egypt named Ali Hassan Kuban, who was in his 80s at the time, sort of the godfather of Nubian music. Old guy, extraordinarily expensive to bring over. We got a lot of sponsorship. He came from Egypt with a band, probably about 10-piece band. They played at SummerStage, and they went back to Egypt. And just thinking about sort of how much work and how much effort it took for us to bring him, but also what it meant for all of those musicians to take that kind of trip to do one show, and thank God it didn't rain. Things like that made us realize that we needed to do more collaboration with our peers around the country to kind of make all of the efforts pay off. After a couple of years of going to WOMEX, there was a lot of talk like, why can't we have something like this here? A lot of us were going to the North American Folk Alliance Conference at the time, and we tried to get more world music within the context of that conference. We realized that the membership wasn't totally accepting of it. It was really more focused on singer-songwriters and sort of British Isle, kind of American roots music. And so at the time, I was at Joe's Pub, and we were finding kind of growing interest in some of the world music artists we had at Joe's Pub. So we did one year, we had Kersh Kali, who's an Asian Underground drummer and tabla player, and Gigi, who's an Ethiopian singer. That did really well. And then the next year, we did a run of dates with Baba Mal from Senegal, and that was an official opening night event for the APAP conference, which is the annual Performing Arts Presenters Conference. And we realized that the market was ready, that there was kind of an interest, and there was also the buying power. So it was a more appropriate place to showcase. So then the following year, partially from the market standpoint of we want to increase the pie so we've got more people to collaborate with, so it's more likely that as a curator, the artists that I want to bring will be able to afford to take the offer, and the tours will be more sustainable for the artists. That was part of it from the kind of the business standpoint, and just to make it easier to do my own work. And then there was also a political side of it. It was post 9/11. We were leading into the Iraq War. There was sort of like growing xenophobia, and so there was this kind of feeling that the U.S. was becoming really isolationist, and that was something that just from a value standpoint didn't feel right. So we decided to basically, instead of talking about it and complaining that there wasn't one, we created globalFEST and did it at the public theater and took over 3 spaces of the public with no money backing us up. Our sort of some parent organizations said that if we lose money, we'll do it. The artist did it as a showcase. All of the money we raised from ticket sales were basically designed to cover the production expenses. And at the end of the day, we had a sold-out event and ended up with $1,000 of surplus or something that we then sort of reinvested in the next year. It got, New York Times, Sunday Times feature, Times Review, and we started seeing that, yeah, it could actually really have impact. And it was done as a one-off just because it was a DIY event that we felt like there was a need. And crowdfunding wasn't even remotely in any, that wasn't on the scene yet. So we went through a few years of all right, do we want to do this again? And after about 3 years of, well, maybe we'll do this again next year, it's really hard. At some point we started to realize that it had become really essential and that our colleagues all around the country were really relying on it to help them with their curatorial process, and that the bands were seeing the outcomes. I don't know if anybody was here yesterday for the Latin music panel, but Sandra Velasquez from Pistolera, who was on the panel yesterday, performed probably about 5 years ago now. And she has been really good actually about tracking the numbers of gigs that came from this one showcase. And they played in the studio in the basement of Webster Hall, about 200 capacity. And she traces at least 50 gigs to that one showcase, just from talking to the presenters. Oh, where did you see us? Or, oh, you didn't see us, but you heard about us because of that show. And so, hearing that kind of story from the artists, I think kind of made us realize that this was an essential thing for us to do, and that is sort of part of my kind of service. And it's creatively fulfilling, especially now at Lincoln Center when I'm doing seasonal Joe's Pub. I'm booking 363 nights a year. Now it's just in the summer with a few atrium shows. So creatively, it's something that sort of gives me something to look to in the off season. It certainly enhanced my own position within the field. So even though I'm not getting paid, it's something that has given me back in sort of kind of career enhancement ways. And I've seen it really transform careers. After about 8 years of doing it as an informal on a handshake, no structure whatsoever, Shanta, Isabel, and I decided we were going to incorporate. We were going to apply for not-for-profit status, 501c3 status. So we started that process, which then made us eligible for certain kind of grants. And we were able to get a grant from the Ford Foundation. After about 8 years of doing it, we had now a demonstrated track record of doing this on 0 resources, really purely on earned revenue from the ticket sales alone. When Kickstarter started, we were pretty early in to use a Kickstarter campaign and set a $10,000 goal, hit about 13. And that was a way for us to not have to raise the ticket price. We kind of felt like the success of the event was based on it being an affordable ticket price. It's 12 bands on 3 stages, mostly bands people didn't know, and people learned to trust us. So we didn't want to screw with that and raise the ticket price so people didn't want to take a chance. So we used Kickstarter as a way to keep the price down and also not have to force our capacity and not kind of try to oversell the room, because the nature of the event as a showcase is people need to be able to get into the room. So we've been using that as a way to sort of grow our individual donor base. And then with the Ford Foundation grant, we then were able to start putting in an honorarium for all the artists. So now they don't get like a high competitive fee, but we set like a per person rate for each member of the band. So we're not judging, we like you more, we like you less. It's how many people are on stage. There's one rate for international artists, one rate for US-based artists, and they each get +1 for their support, for the manager or tour manager or what have you. And so there's at least some of the money coming back. The addition to that, as we started looking at what we're doing, we were like, all right, now there are 7 or 8 years of people who've done this completely for free. We feel bad that we didn't have the money for them back there, so what can we do? And then we were also watching the record label system was collapsing. Some of the independent labels who used to provide a lot of tour support were just, their business wasn't there, tour support wasn't happening anymore. And we're seeing that the artists that we're showcasing were getting a lot of interest, but still in most of the new markets in the country, they were completely unknown bands playing unknown music from countries that people can't even locate on a map. So the offers that they were getting were conservative offers and couldn't cover the real cost of touring. So then we started realizing, all right, we need to find a way to bridge that gap. And so we came up with a touring fund, the globalFEST Touring Fund, so that alumni artists. We basically became grant makers ourselves and came up with a process where artists who had played at a previous edition could apply to us for tour support specifically to get themselves to a new market that they hadn't played before. And so, we try to keep an application that's not too complicated, but that can show, both the financial need, but also why it's important, why those markets are important, what effect it might have on the career. And we set a really low bar of entry. We determined a new market is any place you haven't played before or you haven't played for 5 years. Because in the world music kind of scene, there are lots of groups that might do a tour and then not go back to the same market for years. And at that point, a cold market is essentially, it's like starting over again. So, we define new in a really kind of generous way, and we defined tour as being 2 markets. And only one of them needed to be new. So the idea is like, we want to help support the artists so that they can develop their careers. And so, that again is something that we do it because ultimately we want to see a more sustainable ecosystem for global music. And we also define global music as being US-based bands like Nation Beat and also American roots music, which the whole question of what is world music is one that we try not to answer other than putting together a roster of artists. And so on our World Music Festival, we've had the Stooges Brass Band, who are in the video, who are playing at the Brooklyn Botanical Gardens on Saturday. Christine Salem, who's playing at Symphony Space tonight. Pedrito Martinez, who's playing Cuban, Afro-Cuban music based in New York City. Again, because not only looking at the artists, but also looking at some of our colleagues, they want to present Cuban music. They're still in embargo. It's virtually impossible to get an artist from Cuba here. Goes through waves, but you still want to have Cuban music represented. So, let's look at that. Some people don't want to deal with the expense of international travel or the hassle of the visas. So we're also saying you can present kind of globally minded music, even if it's from our own backyard. And so generally about a third or a quarter to a third of the artists who perform at globalFEST are also US or Canadian based.
Great. We need that for jazz.
Yeah. And there are programs. The Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation has has jazz funding. There are consortia that are kind of looking for that. But we did this really outside of any formalized structure. Now that we've been doing it for 11 years, we're also looking at how can we build an organization, how can we work with some of these established funders so that can keep going on, and so that we can hire a staff, because not every job is going to let me work on globalFEST as much as I do, and not everybody's wife is going to let them work on it at home as much as my wife lets me do it. Yeah, so it's, it is that kind of thing where at some point we know it has value, we know it has impact, and we want it to be sustainable and to allow it to grow because the need is still there.
One of the things that Bill, I'll take your question in just a second. One of the words that Bill used to describe the desire to keep doing globalFEST was it fulfilled a creative need. And I think that's something that some artists don't always appreciate, that the really good presenters are creative people, and they're looking for creative partners to do interesting things with. So I just think that's interesting to keep in mind. What was your question?
Yeah, I have a question about Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, let me say that I think it's great. It's not that I'm against, but I have a problem with the terminology, because it's called donation or support. And let's say that I have a startup company or something like that, and I want to get funding, and I make my company public, and I make 49% of my company in stocks. So I can get money back and start doing some other things in order to not be dependent in like some one man that funds too much of my company. But when I get a Kickstarter, I sell things in order, and I call it donations or support and things like that. Don't you think that people will be tired of supporting artists? Don't you think it should be worth to the fan to get his get a real value out of what he does, and it should be maybe called, I don't know, I just want to hear your opinion, that maybe it shouldn't be called support or donation, and it should just worth more, like to sell my tickets in a lesser price for the fact that I get the money before the show and not after the show.
Well, I think that there are technologies that are more straightforward about this is a pre-sale, and I think at the lower level of Kickstarter, often it does function as a pre-sale. But the bottom line is, at this point, most people, if they want your music for free, they can get your music for free. So anybody who buys a CD, anyone who buys vinyl, is in some way, shape, or form, they're doing that because they think it's the ethically right thing to do to support the artist and the creator. And so the fact that they get a little physical object is sort of bonus, you know? And so I think that Kickstarter recognizes that as you go up the level, then again, the things that they're getting should be intangible things that are, again, it's people are investing in your career, and they're doing it because they support your work. And the return on investment is not a cash return on investment, which would be in the sort of in a kind of a stock model. And there are people who also will raise capital that way, and people who put money in will expect to participate in the proceeds of your career. In the case of Kickstarter or Indiegogo or other ones, saying no, the return on investment is going to be the pride that they get from seeing your success. It might be because they get a cool autographed T-shirt or a copy of sheet music or a lot of emails from the road and proprietary videos from in the studio that no one else can see, or they might get a house concert, or you might go to their house and give them a music lesson or cook them dinner, or like our high level premium for Kickstarter is that the person gets to go on a night on the town of going to shows with the 3 co-producers. In a certain way, this is somebody who, we have somebody who gave us $5,000 this year, who was not somebody that we knew before, complete stranger. It turns out they'd been to 4 editions. We had never known them. We were blown away, and we thought, all right, here's someone who's like an active music lover, who's been to our event, who likes our taste, and so now they get to go and hang out and kind of go to shows, and then from our standpoint, like someone who's willing and able to give us a $5,000 gift to support the festival, this is somebody we want to get to know better. This is somebody, as we develop as a not-for-profit, could turn into a board member. This is someone, if we start to do benefit events, is probably going to have a social circle of other friends that they can mobilize. So it's something that kind of works for us and works for them. And I don't know purely what their motivation was, other than they've been to the event, it moved them, it introduced them to new artists, and they wanted to and had the resources to make it better. That might be somebody giving us, our $60 level includes a ticket to the event. We sell the tickets for $40. So somebody can wait till we go on sale and give us $40. They choose to give us $60 because not only do they want to go to the event, but they recognize the value of it, and they want to make it available for other people. So,
actually, you mentioned something about wanting to maybe sell tickets to the show or something. Scott, do you remember? Wasn't it you that shared that? What's the name of? There's a new now. I'm trying to search and I can't load it.
I was just trying to remember it. There's a new
Peer-to-peer
Kickstarter model.
For touring.
But what it is you pre-sell your tickets to your shows.
In
The
a
show's not booked yet.
In a new market.
In a new market, so you make an agreement with a venue. Months ahead of time, you're going to start selling these tickets on like a Kickstarter model, and the venue.
If you sell enough, the show happens.
Yeah, exactly.
And if not, the people get their money back.
The show is confirmed.
and I think that started in Brazil. I know they do it a lot in Brazil. And especially, and they'll do it if there are international artists who might not otherwise be touring. And then it's like you've got, it turns out that you've got a super fan somewhere in the country, somewhere in the world, who can kind of rally enough friends to do it. Then create enough interest, and then all right, maybe that's going to be your next market that you develop.
I posted it also on the New School Jazz Facebook wall, which is facebook.com/New School Jazz. You may have to scroll down a little bit, but it's on there. It's from a couple days ago. Worth checking out. Do we have any other questions as we're moving forward? Yeah.
One last thing. The way things are now in the industry is that records sell way less than it used to be 5, 10, even 15 years ago, and live shows are the main source of revenue. Do you have any ideas or thoughts about performing online, like new platforms for that, for live performances, and maybe
Like paying for streaming?
Yeah,
type?
it's. I was actually. I don't know a lot about it, but I was on this ASCAP panel earlier this week, and I started a couple of people, kind of in their gig history, had Stage It. I think it's stage.it, if I'm not mistaken. And I guess what Stage It is a virtual concert, and you can set the number of tickets. So basically, you can determine how many people can watch your concert at one time. You can set the price. And so you might say, all right, I'm going to try to sell 50 tickets to this event, and then it's sold out. So it sort of plays with that whole idea of scarcity. It also, you can say, like, if you're an artist at a certain level, you might decide, all right, I just created a bunch of new tracks. I want to try them out in front of an audience, but I'm going to make this something really exclusive to my super fans. Oh, maybe I'll do a $50 or $100, but only 10 people can watch, you know, and then it becomes this like really unique experience. Other people do it on a regular basis. I forget the artist name, but there are people who have built their careers doing Google Hangout concerts.
Really?
And yeah,
Wow.
and like created like tens of thousands of fans by doing concerts almost exclusively, you know, as
That's
virtual
It's
attendance.
amazing.
you think it's something that has potential, because, you know,
It's worked for some people. I don't watch them, but you know. Has anybody here talked about house concerts? I mean, you had Todd P, so I guess he talked about sort of loft parties and those kinds of things.
No, but no, we haven't talked about house parties. Although I mean, one of the reasons I want to have Todd P here was to hopefully inspire some people to use his model to put on their own things and make opportunities for themselves. But what did you want to say about it?
So I'm just going to use a friend of mine as an example. I've got a good friend who lived in New York for many years, worked in the music business. Because of his wife's work, he had to move to Jacksonville, Florida. So he was in Jacksonville and feeling really sort of isolated. He was kind of in the middle of a really vibrant music scene here, and then all of a sudden he's kind of in a new city, not a lot of community, not much going on. So he would fly up to New York every once in a while to see shows and get his fix. And then started kind of realizing that there's really nothing going on. People just, people were not touring to Jacksonville. It doesn't route well. He had a big house, because you can get a big house if you live in Jacksonville and are married to a physician. And so what he started doing is identifying some artists that he thought, that he was friends with or that were friends of friends, and started throwing house concerts. And he had room for, I don't know, about 50 people or so in his living room, would fly the artists down, would put them up in his house, and the artists would do a concert in their living room. They do like, I think in the beginning they did sort of like potluck dinners, so people would bring food or he would cook. Eventually he cut a deal with a local brewery and they would kind of get some kind of free drinks. And so then in this community where there was not a lot going on in the club world that was meaningful to him, he was kind of organizing his own shows. Then he cut a deal with the local arts and crafts market on the Sunday. So one artist friend of ours came in, did a house concert. She's a singer-songwriter. It was her and a guitarist. They flew in. They did his house concert. The next day they did the local arts festival. And because there's not a lot going on, he was able to get them on the local public radio station and get some mainstream media coverage. Sold out the house concert, got a lot of people. They walked out of there, besides whatever little kind of money he gave to them from their pocket, they sold $1,000 worth of merch in 2 days. And he started building that. He brought Stu down.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he's brought kind of a bunch of jazz artists, singer-songwriters.
That's like, what is it, Daryl Hall's thing?
Yeah.
He does this house kind of party thing too.
Yeah, and
Levon Helm did for a while.
the Ramble. Yeah. So part of it is especially if you're on tour and you're trying to get from place to place, you know, one of the, again, like the globalFEST Touring Fund, part of the goal is, you know, sometimes there are a couple of good paying gigs and they're a week apart and they're, you know, 500 miles apart. And so the question is, do you say no to the second gig because you can't bridge it? And do you just take the one show and go back home? Or do you say, I'm going to turn it into a tour? And so house concerts, especially for smaller groups, for singer-songwriters, in a lot of parts of the country that would otherwise be, you know, be flyover stops, become a really viable way to actually create a tour, to fill in dates, to not have to spend money on hotels, not have to spend money on food. You know, if you're on the road, you know, you've got a couple of days that are money coming in, and then any day you're not working is just expense going out. So picking up house concerts, again, sort of like, does it pay to play for free? Well, if someone's going to put you up for the night and someone's going to give you a couch to sleep on, and then you'll be able to sell some recordings at the gig and maybe some t-shirts, then you're not spending the money, you're building some new fans, you're kind of spreading the word, you're building a base in a place that you didn't have a base. That actually becomes a really, really viable kind of career move. So I just want to kind of throw that out again in terms of like entrepreneurship and kind of other ways to approach it. A touring circuit doesn't just have to be about
Doing
playing clubs and performing arts centers. The other thing that I noticed when I was looking at these proposals this week, there were a couple of artists from certain markets where their gig list, it was farmers market, farmers market, farmers market, farmers market. There were like, you know, weeks and weeks of tours to like 4 regional farmers markets, like every Wednesday this one, every Thursday that one, every Friday that one, every Saturday. And again, you don't really think about that as a viable tour circuit, but this, again, you're playing out regularly, you're getting new fans. If you're smart, you're collecting email lists. These are people then that if you're doing a crowdfunding campaign, they become people that you can ask for in other ways. You're selling merch. You know, those people sometimes move to other markets and, you know, then tell their friends. So kind of all those things that you see, there are lots of ways that are outside of sort of a traditional circuit that you wouldn't necessarily think of. You know, it's also like doing school performances. Again, if you are, you know, if you're playing at nightclubs at night and the gigs are closer together, you know, are there opportunities to do a daytime show at a middle school, you know, and kind of do work so what normally would be downtime is revenue generating. So I think it's also just kind of looking at what those other opportunities are.
Scott's going to talk about those things, right?
Yeah.
Daytime, picking up daytime workshop type of opportunities. I mean, who here knows the guys in Moonhooch who are all alums of the program? I mean, how they got their start now, they have a booking agency, they have a management company, they're touring all over the place, and they started it by busking, just playing right on the street, and they have such a dynamic show. And it's 2 saxophones and drums, so it's totally portable, they can play anywhere. That was really, really helped for them. And what's the what's that brass band, Hypnotic?
Yeah.
Another busking group, Hypnotic brass band that then ended up, what's that?
Hypnotic Brass Ensemble.
Yeah.
Yes, they changed it, right, the Hypnotic Brass Ensemble, right. They had changed their name and I always forget that they changed the name. That's another group that just bypassed at the beginning stages the whole club and that whole scene and just took it straight to the people. Something worth trying. I know that Mike and the Moonhooch guys, when they're in town, they go out to Washington Square Park and I ask, how long are you going to play for? They say, you know, until we make as much the money that we want to make. You know what I mean? It's like office hours. It's pretty great. Unless there's any more questions, do we have any last questions as we're running out of time here? Anybody? Okay, well, thank you so much, Bill, for coming. Really appreciate it.